occasionally some colonel or general would go through the hospital and try to be like General Patton, ordering wounded people to go back into combat. And we were always shorthanded, so we did need people. But he would send people back that should never be back in combat. We had a guy named Bingles who was wounded by mortar fragments on a place we call Mother's Day Hill, because of course we were mortared there on Mother's Day. But the fragments went up behind his ear and into his brain. And they would send him back to us, and about every 4 or 5 days he would have a seizure. He had this really violent grand mal seizure, and we'd have to pin him down to the ground until the seizure passed. And then he would lose his memory, and he'd lose his memory for maybe a couple hours, sometimes for a day. He would remember nothing. He didn't even know who he was. And we would go along, and then he would regain his memory, usually suddenly, and then we'd go along until his next seizure. And he should never have been back in combat. And we got a guy returned to us who had been, when he jumped off a helicopter, a bamboo stake called a punji stick had gone up his thigh. And they're soaked in urine and stuff, and they have little hairs on them that stay in you, and it's very hard to stop infection from one of those. And he'd been in the hospital, and they kept operating on him, trying to take out the infected portions. And they made him come back to us, and we could see his muscles. His skin was like saran wrap, and we could see his muscles inside. And if he tried to step, his muscles would bulge way out because there was no skin holding them in. So in order to, even for him even to be able to walk, we had to fold a towel and put it over the spot where his skin had been taken off, and then take 2 pack straps and strap his leg together where he couldn't even walk, and they had sent him back to us. We got people back that just never should have been in combat again. And we just, oh, I don't know, that's just one of the things that the Army did. We had a guy named Omiatek that was sent back to us. He was a guy who had gotten a parasite from water that drilled holes in his intestines. And the worms, they would lay their eggs outside the intestines in the abdominal cavity. So he had all these worms living and growing inside of him. And then they would go back and drill holes in the intestine again. And so he was dripping blood constantly from his ass. And every few months they would cut him open and try to clean out all the worms and the eggs, but they always missed a few. So when they'd sew him back up, the whole thing would start again. And he was so weak and anemic from bleeding all the time, but they would send him back to us. And we had to keep him for 7 days because we only got resupply every 7 days. They would not let us call a medevac for these people. So we would keep him with us, but we'd bend down a couple of saplings at night and tie them together, and he would have to sit on those all night and bleed and try to sleep. And then the next day, we had to get him up, and he couldn't carry a load, so we had to carry all of his stuff because he was so weak and so anemic and should never have been back in combat. Scene.